It's the Real News Network. I'm Sharmini Pires coming to you from Baltimore. Joining me today in our Baltimore studio is the Green Party Vice Presidential nominee, Ajamu Baraka. For 4 decades, he's fought for our human rights. He's also a contributor to the Black Agenda Report and Counterpunch. I thank you for joining us.
It's my pleasure to be here.
So one of the key things that have unfolded this week is that the President Barack Obama's administration has signed a new MOU with Israel, guaranteeing it over $40 billion worth of aid over the next 10 years. Now, this is troubling for us because Israel is the greatest ally that the United States has in the Middle East, and given the current crisis in Syria, and of course, Palestine, this kind of endorsement of the government of Israel troubles many in the international community, not to mention right here in the United States. What do you make of this policy towards Israel?
It is quite bizarre. It is unjustifiable. And it's interesting that Mr. Obama would make some perfunctory comment about the two-state solution and pretending like they're concerned about trying to solve this ongoing horror of the Palestinian occupation, now going on for more than 67 years. There's no moral or political justification for the uncritical support given to the Israeli state by the Obama administration, especially since the government there appears to have no concern for the fundamental rights of Palestinians and no concern for any territorial integrity on the part of this so-called two-state with the continued rapid, aggressive expansion of Israeli settlements. So where is the leverage if the U.S. state was really concerned about trying to finally solve this problem when you decide you're going to give this state $40 billion? So this is a rouge. It's not serious. It demonstrates the contempt for the intelligence of the people of the U.S. That this charade will continue after all of these years.
And as the Green Party, what would your policy towards Israel be?
Our policy would say very clearly that we have to have a resolution of this occupation that results in a settlement that respects and recognizes the rights of Palestinians to self-determination. It says that settlement expansion must halt immediately. It says that the occupation has to be dismantled. It says that there must be a pullback of those settlements if there's going to be viability in a two-state solution. And if there's resistance, then it becomes clear to everyone concerned that the only real solution is a one-state solution in which every person has equal rights, and there's no special positions based on any ethnic concerns or religious membership. So a secular state in which human rights become the grounding principles for how that state operates.
Now, one of the arguments that's been made is as long as the Syrian conflict is going on, the focus of the superpowers like the United States and Russia, not to mention the various parties involved in this proxy war, will be what's happening in Syria that allows Israel to continue to do what it is doing in the Golan Heights and in Palestine. How would you interfere or disrupt that kind of positioning on the part of Israel?
Well, again, Israel has its own set of own agenda. That agenda sometimes corresponds with the agenda of the U.S., but we know that they have their own agenda. What we say is that the conflict in Syria has to be resolved. We would use the power of the state to bring about some kind of national reconciliation of the war in Syria. I don't consider this to be a civil war myself. But the issue with Israel is that there are powerful forces in this country that still believe that Israel has a role to play in a support power for U.S. dominance in that region. And so the justification for continued support is that Israel is facing some kind of existential threat from its neighbors. But if you look at the configuration of forces now in the Middle East, so-called Middle East, one has to ask the question, threat from who? The Saudis have come on board and are vassals of the U.S. and have reconciled themselves to the existence of Israel and, in fact, collaborate with them on a number of issues. The Iraqi state doesn't have the ability to be of a threat to Israel. There's no state in the region except the argument that the Iranians have some type of commitment to doing away with Israel. But that situation, that conflict between those two powers can also be reconciled. So it is a false narrative that there is some kind of a threat to Israeli existence. And because of that false narrative being embraced by so many people in the U.S., then Israel is allowed to continue with its criminal behavior in that region. So that has to stop if there's going to be real stability in that region. So ending the conflict in Syria, withdrawing support from any state in the region that continues to violate the rights of its citizens, including the Saudis and including Israel, imposing a real commitment to resolving these various conflicts has to be at the centerpiece of any administration that's serious about trying to bring about real stability in that region.
So there's a current ceasefire in Syria, and it is temporary.
Yes.
In order to open up roads for humanitarian assistance and so on. The stability of Syria and potential continuation of this ceasefire really is dependent on the United States and Russia being able to bring and convince all of its proxies participating in Syria to some order. How does the Green Party plan to deal with this problem if you were in power?
Well, I think it's clear that every force involved in this conflict has to be part of any solution, including the current Syrian government. This notion that the U.S. and Russia will determine the fate of Syrian people, to me, is a unworkable position. It is a position that denies the voice of the Syrian people, and it's a position that has a colonial character that I reject. So if there's going to be a real resolution, then those forces have to be at the table, but that the centerpiece of that has to be the legitimate government of Syria. So
who is?
Assad and his state. I mean, that is the.
So you support, for the time being, maintenance of the current elected government of Assad?
I support international law, and the only legitimate, only recognized state in Syria is represented by that individual. So we don't support regime change in any country. So that has to be the focus in terms of reinstating international law, using the good offices of the United Nations to bring about some kind of resolution. But all of the entities that have forces have to be at the table if there's going to be real resolutions.
Now, one obvious group that's not going to be at the table, who's agitating much of the problems for all the parties involved, is ISIS. And how do you plan to deal with ISIS?
Well, ISIS has to be isolated um, uh, politically, and its material foundation has to be undermined, which means also that those powerful states like the Saudis and individuals in Saudi Arabia that support ISIS and support the Wahhabist movement, they have to be put on notice that continued support will result in international sanctions and prosecution. There's U.S. law that can be applied to Saudi citizens who are continuing with their support of international terrorism. But those laws have not been applied to the Saudis. In fact, we know that it's been the opposite in terms of the relations between the U.S. and the Western powers with the Saudis. So one of the major sources of support for international terrorism has in fact been the government and the individuals of Saudi Arabia. So we have to address that issue.
Now, while that issue is obvious to everyone, if you remember, Vice President Biden slipped in a speech he was giving at American University, saying, we really have to get our allies under control when it comes to containing terrorism, and yet, 9/11 just passed, and we just have a resolution that both houses have passed that President Obama plans to veto in terms of whether American citizens can hold Saudi Arabia accountable for 9/11 attacks and whether they can take them to court over it. President Obama plans to veto that bill. What would the Green Party do?
Well, I mean, it's obvious that the interests of Obama is to protect their ally in Saudi Arabia. It doesn't matter to them that there are significant numbers of the American people who would like for the victims of 9/11 to have that opportunity to have their day in court. So that is another example of the immoral collaboration that we find the U.S. state involved in with a number of unsavory states around the world. Of course, the Green Party would be in support of any efforts on the part of people in this country to exercise their rights to get at the bottom of what happened with 9/11 and to have an opportunity to bring the Saudi authorities to account.
And finally, in terms of this segment, we are looking at a current election cycle where Donald Trump has said that he would actually redact and nullify the agreement we have with Iran. Mm-hmm. And Hillary Clinton has said she will honor it, as President Obama has been the signatory to this agreement along with P5+1. Now, in the case of the Green Party, what is your position when it comes to the agreement, the nuclear agreement with Iran, and how far will you go in terms of protecting that agreement?
I think it's important for the continuity that those kinds of agreements, if they are in conjunction with international law and U.S. law, that they remain intact. There are sufficient safeguards to ensure that the agreements that are supposed to prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon, that those agreements are sufficient to ensure that that would be the reality. There's no reason to threaten to undermine that agreement. All that would do would be to further destabilize the region. Of course, there are very powerful forces in the Republican Party and in Israel that would like to see that happen, and in Saudi Arabia. But in order to bring about real stability, in order to be able to use the power of the U.S. to bring about peace, it's important that that agreement stand, and that would be our position.
Now, this is a really important question for world peace. We have Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump neck to neck as we speak in terms of the polls, and we are at great risk of having a Trump presidency. And so the support that Green Party has across the country has to be weighted in terms of this risk of world peace. And so when it comes to the crunch, are you going to ask Green Party members to vote for Hillary Clinton in this election in order to avoid war and conflict in the world?
Absolutely not. That would be a violation of our commitment to democracy. It would play right into a narrative that we believe is false. This notion that the Democrat Party under Hillary Clinton would be more committed to peace, there's no evidence to support that. I mean, we look at what has happened over the last 8 years under the Obama administration. We've had a continuation of the war in Afghanistan. We've had the reinvasion of Iraq. We've had the attack and destruction of Libya with the consequent destabilization that's taken place across North Africa. We've seen the subversion in Venezuela and across Latin America. We've seen some dubious behavior, questionable behavior on the part of U.S. intelligence in places like South Africa. We've seen the pivot to China. You know, if that's not militarism, then what do we call that? So the notion that a Donald Trump presidency would be even wilder than that, to me, doesn't really make sense. Plus, we have the evidence, the clear evidence of the direction of the Democrats, where we have the wild statements on the part of Trump, but yet Trump still says things like he would be willing to sit down and talk with the Russians. You know, he represents a sector of the ruling element that just wants to do business. So, you know, this narrative that we would be safer under a hawkish, militaristic Democrat named Hillary Clinton, to me is absurd.
All right, Mr. Baraka, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
And thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.